Hi, I'm Luke and welcome to Down from the Attic. This episode's been much requested, and with the Beano celebrating its 80th birthday last week, it only seems appropriate. This episode, I'm looking at the iconic Beano book. I own every Beano Annual back until 1970. Granted, I wasn't born then, not even in that decade. I was born in 1985. My first annual was 1989. You can tell from the tatty, battered state of this book that I absolutely adored it. I'd read the stories over and over again, and I'd use paper to trace over the drawings. This book was the catalyst that started my Beano collecting. Beano Annuals would, and still do, come out a month or two before Christmas, and one of the staples in my house was I'd find a wrapped Beano Annual at the end of my bed on Christmas morning. And I think this was more to do with my mum and dad wanting an extra few hours sleep on Christmas morning than for me to wake up with a surprise there. But I'd spend a few hours every Christmas morning just flicking through the new Beano Annual. It was magic. As my collection grew, I became interested in the books before '89. My cousin, who is a few years older than me, had annuals from the '80s, and I wanted to get my own copies. What you see here is years of searching through second-hand bookstores, car boot sales and charity shops. The first Beano Annual was printed in 1940 and was called the Beano Book, and since then there's been a new one every single year. There's a good reason that my collection only goes as far as 1970. Price and rarity. Beano Annuals, especially older ones, are outrageously expensive, especially the ones from the 1940s. If you remember my review from the Beano comics, the Second World War saw paper rationing and this affected the number of annuals printed. People were also encouraged to recycle paper too, and the other major factor, these books were for children. Finding mint condition vintage Beanos is difficult in this regard, and many of my Beano Annuals have seen heavy use. The books have puzzles and cut-out toys, and finding copies that haven't been penned in or snipped to hell proves tough. The main thing most collectors look for is the condition of the spines. The older books were quite susceptible to the spines breaking and peeling off. My '89 annual has no spine left at all. The modern annuals with modern printing and binding techniques don't suffer from this in the slightest. From cover to cover, these books are absolutely packed full of jokes and humour. Near enough all the books have different covers from front to back with a multitude of jokes there for you to spot. The inside cover is much the same. Man, I absolutely love this Beano Town themed one. The covers themselves are gorgeous to look at in some cases, and my absolute favourite, 1994, by a long, long way. What I find interesting is how the Beano's changed and evolved over the years. I mentioned this in my comics review, but in the annuals it's far more noticeable. The 1989 annual was partial colour strips, meaning that certain strips were given the full colour treatment and the others having the 3 colour treatment. Getting my hands on the 1988 annual, the whole annual is only 3 colours. A year later, in 1990, the Beano had gone full colour and has remained so ever since. Amazing to think though that a 3-year gap would cause such a big difference in the annuals. The other thing that's more noticeable is redesigns of the characters. Looking at the 70s annuals, to the 80s, to the 90s, to the modern annuals, you can see how Dennis the Menace has changed over the years. My earlier annuals still have Biff or the Bear on the cover, but by 1975 Biff disappeared off the cover, much like he was replaced by Dennis on the cover of the weekly comics. However, certain strips look absolutely identical in how they're drawn. The Bash Street Kids are drawn and look identical to how they were drawn nearly 50 years ago, and I absolutely love that. Certain strips only seem to surface within the annual. I don't ever seem to recall General Jimbo ever being in one of the weekly comics, but he returns year on year with his robotic army, and I love this too. It's like tradition, it's like catching up with an old friend you've not seen in ages. One thing that having more pages in the book than the comic means is that the artists and writers have more space for larger stories and larger art pieces. Some of these are fantastically drawn. Just look at the detail on this 1997 strip where the Beano Town kids go into space. It's wonderfully detailed. The jump to full colour panels in 1990 saw a trend throughout the 90s of using photographs for panels, and the Beano Town kids headed into the real world. Two favourites here are Ivy the Terrible visiting the Beano Town offices to see how the comic is made, and causing havoc. The other is 2 girls inviting Minnie the Minx to prank their dad. Wearing that Blockbusters jumper, I'd say he had it coming. The changes in social norms is more glaring to see in the annuals. The 70s and the 80s, Dennis and his pals still got walloped on the backside with a slipper for being little swines to adults. The 90s, Dennis gets punished or grounded in more inventive ways. Rereading these books for this review reminded me of characters and strips that had been dropped throughout the years, and ones that were very much of their time. Karate Sid, I'd completely forgotten about him. Karate Sid. Nope, no idea what this was parodying. As mentioned earlier, the books would have puzzles, games, and instructions on how to make your own Beano-themed merchandise. I definitely remember making these Dennis and Gnasher grass heads out of a pair of tights. I'd like to see more of this prevalent in the modern annuals. These were definitely fun. The Beano has had a long tradition of lampooning and poking fun at celebrities, and even in the older annuals you can spot this. Look at Bruce Forsyth here, fantastic stuff. Admittedly, the older the annuals, the more esoteric the reference, and I don't mind admitting that I don't know all the celebrities referenced. I have zero clue who this is supposed to be. In 2001, the Beano did something massively different for the annual, the inclusion of 3D models. Dennis in his Menace-mobile, God I love that thing, took off to outer space to meet robotic Beano robots. These strips really stand out from the hand-drawn look of the rest of the annual. They did this for a few years during the early 2000s. Remember that awesome robotic Gnasher from before? Yep, that got made into a 3D model too, and I can't fault them for wanting to reuse this design. It's just too good. You know before when I said that I used to get the Beano annual every Christmas? Yeah, that never stopped. I still get the Beano every Christmas. This is an ongoing collection. Admittedly, I flicked through the annual immediately to find Calamity James, my absolute favourite strip. This is something I've always done, and finding him still in the Beano puts a huge, huge smile on my face. Beano, please never get rid of James. He's fantastic. The older books may look bigger and thicker to their modern counterparts, but they contain roughly the same amount of pages. It's just the older annuals use much thicker paper. The other thing now with modern annuals is the majority of colouring of the strips is done digitally now. It's no longer hand painted, and I really do miss that. There's something indescribably warm about the older annuals, knowing that someone carefully painted and drew the panels. I can't put it any better than that. This is personal preference, but yeah, I much favour the hand-drawn and hand-painted look. The annuals also advertise within them the Dennis the Menace fan club and the Beano fan club, and the other annuals out around that time too, specifically the Dennis the Menace annuals and the Bash Street Kids annuals. A full annual of Dennis or Bash Street Kids strips. I love the Bash Street Kids, so getting some of these as well at Christmas was always a treat. However, my collection isn't just the annuals. Beano has had a large range of merchandise over the years. I held on to other bits of Beano goodness. A couple of Christmases I received Beano calendars, completely and utterly useless now, but the art is just too nice for me to want to get rid of. This 98 calendar has vintage strips for you to read. A really nice idea. Ladybird Books brought out a few Dennis the Menace books in the mid-90s, my favourite being Dennis's Diary. You really get a look into the mind of a menace with it. It's very fun and silly, with Gnasher prints across the pages, clippings and photos, even a fried egg stuck in there. The other book, ooh, what's in this book? Ah, I'd forgotten about these! Beano corn snacks! There was also a Dennis the Menace cereal too in the 90s, strawberry flavoured if I remember, and yeah, it was pretty disgusting. I remember getting it once and never again. Anyway, the Dennis the Menace puzzle book had all sorts of Beano themed puzzles, word searches, crosswords and spot the differences. In 1989, Merlin released the Beano sticker book, a sticker collecting series. I barely remember kids trading stickers on the playground, and I think I was probably a little bit late to the party with this, and as such I never completed it. Certain stickers were panels to a story, and without it, you'd have no clue what was happening. The best bits of this book were the reusable and positionable stickers in the middle. Make your own Beano town scene. Fantastic! Now, for you loyal viewers, I like board games. I know I've kept it quiet, but the Beano also introduced a few board games too. The first and most battered looking is the Beano card game. Love the fact that the packaging looks like a comic. The game plays a little bit like blackjack. Everyone is dealt 5 cards, and the objective is to rid your hand of your cards. The top is turned over and you have to match either the character or the border colour of the card. However, each card has different rules, so Roger the Dodger means pick up 2 cards, Dennis is miss a go, Minnie the Minx reverses direction. Many a rainy day was passed with this little game. The other board game that I own is Dennis the Menace the Game. I loved this as a kid. First off, wow, the art is fantastic. I mean, it's a Beano comic made board game. It couldn't even look bad if it tried. The objective of the game is to make use of every tool in your menacing arsenal. Pea shooters, catapults, water pistols, itching powder, and menace the entire town and make it safely back to the tree den, your hideout. The first person to use all the weapons is the winner, and Menace Supreme. Every player is dealt 6 Menace weapon cards, the Menace location cards are placed near the specific location, and the dad cards are shuffled. everybody starts in the den except Dad. He starts off at home. I just want to say I love the fact that Dennis's dad is represented by a slipper. It's such a classic Dennis thing to do. You roll to move around the board, but there's 2 dice, one for you and one for Dad. And this is where you can be a real jerk to your opponents. You can have Dad chase after your foes, but similarly, players will do the same to you too. Having the slipper landing you, very good Beano, I get it, means that you're sent immediately to the den and you have to pick up another weapon card, putting you further away from ridding yourself of your cards. Dad's slipper can also be strategically positioned in front of locations to stop opponents from entering, which I particularly like doing. Once you've reached a certain location, draw a location card. Okay, here we go, supermarket. Chaos in the canned food aisle when you topple a pyramid of canned beans. Under the card description, which by the way they're all different, funny and inventive ways of menacing, are pictures of the menacing weapons. If you have a match you can discard one of your cards. Dotted around the board are Dad squares. Land on one of these and you have to draw a Dad card. Dad cards can help or hinder you. They can move you around the board, force you to pick up more cards. Sometimes you'll be asked to dispose of weapons by passing them to other players. It's really a lucky dip whether it benefits you or not. Overall, this is a simple game to play, but undoubtedly fun and an absolute must-have for Beano fans. The Beano is 80 years old, 80, and it really shows no sign of stopping. With children still buying the comics and the annuals and the new Dennis to Menace TV series coming out, and the characters still being loved after all these years, it's a good time to be a Beano fan. I can't understate how much of a big part of my childhood the Beano was, and still is, as I'm guessing it is for many of you people watching. But the Beano will always be special to me. Thanks for taking the time to look through my collection. I know it's far from complete. Let me know if you've got a favourite annual or a favourite annual cover. I'd be very interested to hear. To all the Beano fans out there, happy 80th. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.